So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. And tonight we have Eric Smith, who is going to be presenting details about the data flow screen component. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Eric and let him run with it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that, Jason. I am going to chat tonight about a component that I've created. I call the data table. It's a way of showing formatted data in a Salesforce flow. And I'd like to just go through a little bit of the history of that, some of the use cases, and hopefully give you some ideas of how you may be able to put this to use in your own orgs. A little bit of background about myself. I'm a technical architect at Gears CRM. I'm a Salesforce MVP, got 6 certifications. I've been in the technology business for way too long, over 45 years. I've got a few contact links here for you as well. I don't consider myself a developer, but I do consider myself stubborn enough that if I find something that I want Salesforce to do that it doesn't do, I may just dig in and try and find a way to make it happen. So with that in mind, I've created a number of different components and different things, but why did I create the data table component? And the reason for that is I found that when I was creating flows where I wanted to present information to the user to select from multiple records, the only choice that was built into Flow was the dynamic record choice. It's pretty interesting standard component. It allows you to get a collection of records, let the user select one or more of those records, and then you could use that record or that collection of records in your flow. The major drawback I saw with this component was it only allowed me to show the user one field. You can present one field at a time for that record collection for that dynamic choice. And that really didn't work for what I wanted to present to the users. I wanted to show more information. So as you can see on the screen here, I crammed in a whole bunch of information. And I did that by creating a formula field that took information from 4 other fields and kind of crammed it all together so I could display names, some quantities, address, IDs, other information on the screen all at one time. But as you could tell, the formatting of that leaves a lot to be desired. It's a little hard to read. And I wanted to be able to present something like a list view that would allow me to put this data in columns and be easier to present and read on the screen. So that's where the data table component came in. And that allowed me to do something very similar, which is display multiple fields from a collection of records and allow the user to select one or more of those records from each of those collections. And here's an example of how this would look on a screen using the data table rather than a dynamic record choice. And let's just step through some examples here. This is showing the dynamic record choice again versus what you can do with the data table. The data table allows you to select multiple records. You can use radio buttons, select single records if you want, but even more interesting is it provides an interface that allows the user to interact with it on their own terms. They can change column widths, they can sort, they can filter, they can do any number of things with that table while it's displayed on the screen, and gives them the full ability to interact with that. So it definitely gives I think a much cleaner, more robust user experience being able to do that. So here are some of the points that I touched on. Why the data table? It's a better display. Some of the things that the user can do with it. One of the things I didn't show on there is you can also support inline editing, so you can make changes and interact with the data and make changes to the data while the data table is displayed in your flow. This has become a very popular component. I ran a query the other day from the dev org, and since the beginning of 2021, this component has been installed in over 15,000 Salesforce orgs. So I hear all the time from folks with various use cases and ways that they're using it. So it's nice to see something like this, take off and become a benefit for other people as well. And that kind of steps back to one of the reasons why I create things like this is when I find a need that I have, I don't want to just go and solve that need and do a one-off solution. I would much prefer to create something that is configurable and more generic. So if I need to use it again in the future for a slightly different use case, it's already built. If anybody else needs to use it and wants to use similar functionality, they have something that can be configured and administered without having to start from scratch and build a one-off component to do that. So let's just go through a quick demo of actually building a flow that uses the data table. In this example here, we'll get started. I'm going to create a screen flow, and I actually prefer the auto layout mode, but I'm going to add a get records. This is the first item in my flow. I want to get a collection of records that I want to present to the user in my data table. So in this case, I'm going to use the account object, and I'll just get a collection of accounts. We'll get all of them that are out there, and I'll put them in a collection variable for all of the records. And now to display those records on a flow screen, we're going to put on or insert the data table component, and then configure it so we can display the records and the columns the way we want. So what we're seeing here is a custom property editor that allows the user that's building this to put all the different parameters in for that. So they're selecting the object, the collection of records. You can go in, display a list of all of the fields on the selected object, in this case, the account, so they can pick and choose the fields they want. You don't have to remember the API names and be going back and forth to your documentation to do that. It's just a quick pick and choose. And then you actually have a sample data table that while you're configuring this component, you can interact with the data table, and the settings that you have when you interact with it are saved and become part of that configuration in your flow. So here we're seeing I can do things like change column widths. I can change the column labels. I can add icons to my column headers if I want to. I can pick and choose icons. Some of the other things we can do here is you can change column alignments. You can do left, right, or center alignment. You also have the ability in here to I mentioned to change the labels, but you can also specify on the columns whether each individual column or all of the columns can be edited by the user or filtered by the user. So we can turn that capability on and off. So once that configuration is done with this configure column wizard, there's a few other things we can apply to the table itself. We got some behavior options, whether doing single or multi-row selection. If we're doing editing, we can hide or use the cancel save buttons. There's a whole number of different attributes that you can assign and really fine tune the table to be exactly the way that you want it. So it's not just one way each time. You really can interact with it and make it exactly the way that you want to have it. So I've done my get records. I've created my screen. I've configured and put the data table component on the screen. So now if we run this flow, we'll see what it looks like for the user interacting with the flow. So here's the table that I configured, and the user can continue to interact with that. They can still change things like column width and sorting. They can turn column wrapping on and off. They can filter and any number of things while they're interacting with the table in the flow. This is all built into the component itself. So just I want to give you a little bit of a history on the component. I mentioned I wasn't a developer, but I know enough to be dangerous, I guess. When I first created this, we didn't have Lightning Web Components. We just had Aura components, and we were fairly restricted, or I was fairly restricted on what I could do with that. So the original data table as an Aura component, I had to, for example, hard code all of the objects that I may want this to interact with. We didn't have that dynamic object selection when we were configuring the component back then. I had to specify individual attributes for each and every attribute for each and every column had to be put in as a separate parameter or separate attribute for the flow. Eventually, when Lightning Web Components became available, they started offering a dynamic object selection. So you could select at the time of configuration which object you wanted the component to interact with. And at that time, this was such an important and powerful new capability. This is when I decided to bite the bullet, learn how to create Lightning Web Components, and actually move this off the Aura component platform and created a Lightning Web Component just so I could take advantage of the dynamic object selection. I also created that was when I first created a helper or a wizard flow to help with some of my parameters and attributes. So I actually created a flow that shows that data table that I was interacting with, and it was using the outputs or the results of that flow to provide the attributes I needed to then plug into my Lightning Web Component. So what users were doing originally was they would put the helper flow on one side of the screen, the flow or data table they were configuring on the other side, and copy and paste back and forth between the two so they could configure the component a little easier. And then a while later, along came a new capability for Lightning Web Components, which was a custom property editor. And I think this is where it really took off, is this now gave me the ability to present a better look and feel to the user configuring a component like this, to organize and group the various attributes the way I wanted to do it. So this is actually another Lightning Web Component that I'm using to interact with the user that's configuring the data table Lightning Web Component. And that really made for a much cleaner, much better user experience. And to take it one step further is I came up with a way to actually embed a flow inside of the custom property editor, so I could pull my configuration column configuration wizard inside the custom property editor to actually configure the columns on the fly. So what I actually have here with this built-in wizard flow is I have the data table component running inside a custom property editor to provide a sample data table that the user is configuring to configure the data table that they're setting up on the flow. So it's actually running itself inside of itself. It got a little confusing in the long run, but being able to pass that data back and forth between all the various pieces between the flow and the property editor and the component itself, I think makes for a very powerful, easy to use component. In addition to this, I added the ability to pick and choose the columns, as we saw in the original demo. And and this allows you to not just pick the columns, but also rearrange them as well, which is makes it easier for the configuration. And this is just an example here again of that custom wizard that is running inside of the property editor, which is actually running the component, the data table component that it's configuring. I also added the capability to save configurations. So if somebody has multiple flows that say are all presenting data tables for the account object, rather than having to recreate each one each time, you could save configurations and bring them in and reuse them in other flows. So you have all of the same attributes and parameters, and you can save and reload those as you need them. A couple other recent additions that I made to this is, in addition to supporting all Salesforce standard and custom objects, I extended this to support Apex defined objects. In other words, you can define your own object or your own data format to display in the data table. In fact, you can even build a JSON formatted table inside of your flow on the fly, and then have the data table component take that string and display it as a data table. One use case where I put this to use was I created a utility that I wanted to be able to display a list of flows and process builders and be able to show which ones were active, which ones were inactive, and give the user the ability to batch select a group of inactive flows or process builders and batch delete them. If you've ever interacted, especially with Process Builder, when trying to go in and delete inactive process builders, it's a very slow, very tedious process. I got tired of doing that. I figured, well, there must be a better way, and this is when I ended up creating this particular functionality. In order to display a table of process builders or flows, I actually had to pull fields in from 3 different objects inside of Salesforce. So taking those 3 different objects and combining them into my own Apex defined object in my own format, I was then able to take that as a single collection and display it as a data table and allow the user to interact with that table. Some of the other things that this supports, as you see, that we can do some fairly specialized formatting of individual cells, individual rows. I have the ability that using formulas and images and other things, you can display images, you can display links, you can do a number of different things in the table that help with interactivity. And also you can both select and inline edit data within that table while you're interacting with it. So you can have selected records coming out of it. You can have edited records coming out of it, and then choose to act on that data as such later on in the flow. So this is just a real quick overview of what the data table component is, how it came about, and some of the ways it could be used. I do have some links here, and I'll make this slide deck available to the group, so you actually have some live links here. There's some, I've created a lot of documentation around this, so there's some links to that, as well as some specialized posts on some of the unique use cases that are available for this. I'm more than happy to take any feedback, answer any questions. If any of you have used the data table component, I'd be happy to hear some of your use cases behind that. So I'll turn it back over to you as the group, and we can have a more ongoing discussion if you like.
Great, thank you, Eric. There was one question that came in from the chat. Does it work with call outs?
Do you mean a call out to get the data to be displayed? Maybe a little clarification on.
Yes, I mean get the data from an API, for example.
Yes. Yeah, the ability to provide that Apex defined or JSON formatted data. You and your flow can bring in data from any source that you want and format it any way that you want, and then pass it into the data table to be displayed in that format and allow you to interact with it. Same thing, editing, selecting, sorting, filtering, any of that.
Okay.
Go ahead. I had a question as well. When you're working with just a standard get record, is there the ability to get like data from a related record, for example? So say like I wanted to get, say I'm on the contact and I wanted to get the account, something off of the account record.
There is a few different ways to do that. One is a very simple workaround is you have a formula field on your if you're, say, showing a list of contacts and you wanted to pull some data from the parent account or of that child record, you can have a formula field on that child record that's pulling that data in. Then it's available for you to display in the table. You can make the column label or header anything you want it to be. The only cross-object lookup that currently is built into the data table is I've set it up so that whatever the object's name field is, whether,
Right.
in account, it's the name, in case, it's the case number. In other words, whatever the object's name field is, it does give you optionally the ability to display that as a link back to that object. So that's the only built-in capability I have to do that. The other way of doing it is what I have on the screen here is what I ended up doing with the Apex defined objects and displaying flow information or process builder information is I pull data in from multiple objects and then put it into a format inside the flow that I could then pass to the data table as a single collection.
Yeah, so just wrap it as a Apex object.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Does this work with different locale? Like if I'm using this in Europe or with like the date formatting and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't show the particular attributes here, but you have the full capability to do type attributes, cell attributes, and other things. So you have control over the formatting of currency fields, the formatting of date fields, date time fields. I mean, this supports being able to put those attributes in there and format it the way you want. There are some built-in conversions in here to convert from to the running user's time zone. There's also optionally, I have an option in here to, in a multi-currency organization, to convert the currency to the running user's currency. And you can turn that on or turn it off. You can do it either way. So there are some of those features built in. So around locale and around currency and that type of thing.
Very cool. Very cool.
Hey, this is Theo Blag. I got here a little bit late, but I wanted to have an opportunity to speak to you,
Sure.
Eric, because I've used this data table, and actually I've reached out to you about making some adjustments to this data table in the past.
Yeah.
And you're very flexible and receptive to those kinds of changes, and kind of had a really quick turnaround. So I wanted to have an opportunity to thank you for helping me out, because this tool is absolutely fantastic. I've used it at several different places at my previous employer, and it's very easy to use. You just drop it in, and it works exactly how you expect it to. So this will probably be in every single org I develop in going forward.
Yes. And I really appreciate that feedback, especially from developers and other folks that come up with new ideas or use cases that I may not have run into before. So I do try and make myself open to that type of feedback and to that type of assistance, because when I do that, it's not just you that I'm helping. It could be a number of other people that may have run into the same issue or have a very similar use case. And the more improvements that can be made and changes and enhancements to it, the better. I mean, it just helps everybody. So I like having this as an open source, and it's really helped to improve the component over time as well by doing that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic tool. So I'm glad you're having an opportunity to kind of go around and show other people this, because this solves a lot of issues, really reduces the amount of development time you may require if to solve this kind of a problem. Really, you can't do it. You can't do a data table without code unless you use something like this. So
Yes.
it's definitely cut down on a lot of development time.
And it's a real it's, as I well know, it's a real challenge doing this in code, because if you look at the Lightning design system and you look at all of the base components that are out there, this is probably the most poorly designed base component they have, and probably one of the least capable base components that they have out there. I mean, it could really use a pretty major overhaul. So it is difficult to pick it up and start using it from scratch, because there are a lot of gotchas out there, and there's a lot of there's a lot of limits too. So yeah, this can be a huge time saver for somebody that just needs to put a table in somewhere and move on to the next requirement.
Any other questions or feedback?
Jason, I will either email you or Carlos this slide deck,
Perfect.
so you can make it available to your group. They can go through that, and also that last slide with any of all of the contact information and the links to the source code, the links to the documentation that'll be available for everybody in your group.
Great. And this this recording will also go out, like it does for all the other meetings as well. So it'll be out there. This is a fantastic looking product. I'm really impressed with how much how much in depth and detail you have in this. This is, I wish I had found this a few years ago, honestly, because I've fought with the data table and and lost a lot, so this is really cool. I'm really impressed with this. So kudos to you. This is really good.
Well, thank you, and hopefully it'll help a lot more people as well. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
all right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful evening. Hope your weather gets better down there.
Yeah. All right.
All righty.